I want to thank you for coming to our session on technology and jobs, or essentially the panel on how much we should be afraid of the robots. I'm Josh Barrow from the New York Times, and before I got here to LA, I was conducting a little bit of field research for this panel in Las Vegas, where there are a surprising number of jobs in casinos that are at risk of automation. Now, first of all, you see the fully automated craps and roulette machines on the casino floor for people who find that roulette involves too much human interaction. And the craps machine actually has like a piston in the middle that throws this giant pair of dice. Those machines actually do not seem to be very popular. Most people seem to be playing actually real craps, except in jurisdictions like New York, where you have a regulatory barrier to games that are operated by actual humans. The job that's at greater risk of automation on the casino floor seems to be card dealers, in that part of their job is getting automated away with auto-shuffling machines. Now, you've had them at blackjack for a long time. In the last 10 years, they've come in poker. And these are actually fairly smart machines. They don't just do the physical action of shuffling the cards. They can tell if cards are missing or if they're upside down. And so I think the key question for the dealers is, what does it mean that part of their job has gotten automated away? Now, that makes the dealers more productive. Do people therefore play more hands, and so you have an increased contribution to GDP from casinos in the form of more gambling, which maybe is undesirable, but in most cases, if contribution to GDP is going up in most industries, we'll be able to say that's good. Or does it just mean that people lose their money faster and play fewer hands, and therefore there's demand for fewer hours of labor from dealers? And what does that slack in the job market mean? The dealers have gotten more productive. You should expect their hourly wages to go up, but maybe if the job market overall is slack, then that extra productivity is just turning into higher profits for the casino operators, and the dealers are left with fewer jobs and wages that are no higher per hour. So I like to think of that as a little microcosm to questions that people are asking all over the labor market, all over the world right now. How is my job changing? And if I get more productive, what does that actually mean for me as somebody who needs to work for a living? And so on this panel, I want to try to look at three broad questions of this question of interaction between technology, automation, innovation, and the labor market. First of all, we obviously have a lot of labor market problems today with excessive unemployment and weak wage growth. And so to what extent, if at all, are those problems related to technology and innovation? Or when people talk about this as a question related to today's labor market problems, is that distracting from other issues in the labor market, such as weak aggregate demand? Second is the question going forward. Even if the robots are not taking our jobs now, are they going to take them over the next 20 years? What do we see as changes happening in the world that may change the way technology will interact with the labor market? And third, is that going to end up being a good thing or a bad thing for workers if it happens? You can sort of imagine this dystopian future where the handful of people who own the computers have all the money and there's nothing for anyone else to do. But you can also sort of imagine the George Jetson future where everybody has a 9-hour work week. And the fact that the robots do everything for us actually just allows us to lead lives that are much more oriented toward leisure than the lives we lead today. So those are three big questions. I want to start, well, first let me introduce the panel. We have here Brad DeLong, who's a professor of economics at Berkeley and also a blogger at the Center for Equitable Growth. Brad has promised me that he will be the robot bear on the panel today. So we will see if that holds up. Jeremy Howard is the CEO of Enlytic, which is a company that uses advances in machine learning to improve medical diagnostics. So he's coming after the doctors with his robot doctors. Amy Webb is a digital media futurist and the founder of Web Media Group, and she advises clients in a variety of fields on near-future trends like the ones we're discussing today. And Gerald Huff is the principal software engineer at Tesla, where he's the technical lead for Tesla's cloud-based computing systems. And he recently completed a novel that looks at the impact of and solutions to the problem of technological unemployment. So in at least a fictional way, Gerald has been thinking about these issues extensively. So let's start with today, and let's start with Brad. When we look at today's labor market, should we be blaming the robots yet?
We shouldn't be blaming the robots much yet. Remember, it was only 15 years ago that the proportion of 25 to 54-year-olds in America at work hit its all-time global high of 81.7%. And you can worry that a few percentage points of 25 to 54-year-old males who ought to have been at work were instead stone slackers living in their parents' basement. You can worry that a few percentage points of females were people who really didn't want to be working, but were doing so to gain health insurance or to deal with the fact that they had a slacker living in the basement in the house. But 81.7% of 25 to 54-year-olds indicates that the robots had not yet arrived. that there were lots and lots of jobs in the American economy. You can say that the distribution of income was extremely off, that a whole bunch of those people wanting to work and willing to work and eager to work had relatively low bargaining power in the labor market. But that wasn't so much because robots per se had taken away the high-paying jobs they would have had. It was more a shortage of skills, or rather a mismatch of skills, or rather the fact that globalization had come faster than anyone had been expecting, and that the share of America's population that was getting educated had, once we started making people take out large student loans, stopped growing as fast as we had expected before. So the fall from 81.7% down to our current extraordinarily low, in historical perspective, 77 point what's it percent. Something we last saw back in the mid-1980s, back when the feminist revolution was only half accomplished. Almost all of that is due to the unfortunate macroeconomic history that we've had over the past 15 years, and it indicates a failure of our ability to manage the system and distribute the production of which we're capable, rather than the fact that the robots have come for us. Why haven't the robots come for us? Well, you might, if you take a historical perspective, go back 4,000 years to when we domesticated the horse. Right? Back when we domesticated the horse, kind of a third of human outside the household labor was pulling heavy things along, whether plows or carts. Horse makes that obsolete, yet people found things to do. Go back 3,000 years ago to kind of the serious invention of the standing loom. If you read the Odyssey, say, practically every adult woman you run across when you meet her, she's at her loom. She's throwing the shuttle back and forth, a highly routinized activity. Even queens are, even Helen of Troy is sitting there at her loom, weaving another row in a big piece of cloth that's going to be a blanket for somebody. That occupation became obsolete with the development of the automatic loom in the 1830s. Yet we found other things to do precisely because every animal, every machine, every piece of technology we could find needed some sort of cybernetic control mechanism to make it go. And also, as we acquired more stuff, we needed to have this large white-collar bureaucratic distributional apparatus sitting on top of it. And whether for blue-collar cybernetic control problems or for white-collar information classification problems, the human brain is a supercomputer that fits in a shoebox and draws 50 watts of power. And not even this can match it yet for most of what we do. So all our technology was historically a friend to human labor, because although it did make human backs and thigh muscles obsolete and did make human fingers largely obsolete, it made human brains much more valuable. And that's what the rise of the robot threatens. Huge numbers of things that people have done with their brains to add value are going to vanish. And it's not now. It's probably not in the next 20 years, except in selected occupations. But look forward a century. And a century ago, people here will be looking back at us and saying, why didn't they recognize what was going to happen to them?
So Brad mentioned specific occupations. I know, Amy, we were talking before the panel. You have a list of 12 fields that are in danger. Mm-hmm. Who should be afraid of the robots?
So Brad's saying that we maybe shouldn't be worried right now or even in the next century, and I might argue with that and say that you should be quite worried, and that the white collar and the blue collar of the future is in fact not a collar but a hoodie. So if I can, I'm going to tell you what those fields are, and I see some of you, I can see your name tags, and you should be on the concerned list. But we're all data driven, and so before I tell you what they are, maybe we can go to slide 11. I'm going to show you why I think this. So we're all familiar with the S-curve, and this is the S-curve that we use. In my area of forecasting, it's very data driven and research driven, and so we are looking at the fringe, and from our point of view, the fringe, for example, if you're trying to figure out the future of banking, Your fringe is not just in the finance and the banking sector, but you have to consider what hackers are doing. And
I'm sorry, explain briefly what the S-curve is.
That.
So it shows the
Right.
adoption of a new technology?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So this is what we sort of, so anyway, we start on the fringe and we're looking for areas of convergence. So we look at these disparate fields. Once we find an area of convergence, then we see first movers and we see that sort of trend, that thing taking off. If you can go to the next slide, please, which is 12. I just want to point out that sometimes we get distracted by shiny objects, and sometimes there's actually an area of second convergence. And so oftentimes we will dismiss emerging technology because some element of it failed or didn't, or Twitter lost a bunch of money or something happened, right? And those are shiny objects that distract people, and so they don't see the disruption that's actually coming because they're not looking for that area of second convergence and then to see the trend take off. So with that in mind, let me tell you the areas that I think are ripe for disruption, not in the next century, but in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, which is the space that I operate in. I'm going to go through these quickly. So anybody in the banking, mortgage, and escrow areas? So is anybody in the room? A few of you? So if you are a middle person in this sector, blockchain for you is going to be a disruptor, and whether or not Bitcoin ever takes off, that's sort of beside the point. It's the underlying infrastructure that will dramatically change the work that's being done. Anybody in the telco space, so the AT&Ts and the Verizons and the Sprints, huge swaths of those workforces will be eliminated because the reality is that right now we do need the pipes, but we don't actually need phone numbers to make phone calls. So everybody in that space will be disrupted quickly. Lawyers, any lawyers in the room? So unless you're in litigation, litigators are safe for the time being. Lawyers, because of open data initiatives, we've got peer-to-peer databases, we've got data sharing, we've got file sharing, we've got all these different things, and more governments that are accepting digital transactions. Anyhow, so lawyers will have a problem. I was a journalist, a foreign correspondent a long time ago, and my former field is facing significant disruption through algorithmic distribution and curation. Anybody in the customer service space, IBM Watson is doing all kinds of really interesting things. One of the things that it can do, although it's not positioned this way at the moment, is to replace everybody in the customer service sector. Right now, it can scrape your data. It can learn everything that you are most likely to respond to. And if you're Southwest Airlines, who, by the way, doesn't outsources all of its data, and you've got an angry customer, Watson will tell you what's going to move the needle for that person. And in my case, it's probably not a $200 voucher for a future flight. So I just want to get to where I'm going. So we can use predictive analytics in that field. Anybody in the transactional space, so this could be insurance, this could be your toll booth operator, anybody who deals with transactions, anything the displacement will happen through wearables, scannables, again, predictive analytics. Factory workers is sort of an obvious one, but the disruption will come through haptics, which is it's a way to sort of virtually operate in a manufacturing center where the actual manufacturing is happening somewhere else. And haptics is a tangible, tactile, sensor-based system where you can feel what you're working on, even though that actual work is being done, nowhere near you. And marketing, so we've got anybody in the marketing space and advertising space. I was in a previous panel, somebody was talking about teaching kids how to code so that they can work with Google Ads. And that's a big waste of money. So I've got many, many more, but I guess we'll sort of stop there for the moment.
Well, so one interesting thing about that list is that if all those changes come to fruition, there will be a lot of people whose jobs will be disrupted, but that also should mean enormous productivity growth, much more so than we've seen.
Well, it depends on how you define productivity, right? You need to ask Brad about the finance piece of this, but in terms of output from workers, we were talking about this earlier, right? Where you have, there's a challenge here. So an algorithm may eliminate 100 jobs, but that doesn't mean that you have one person working on that algorithm. You may need several people because somebody's got to babysit that algorithm to make sure that it doesn't go off the rails and start doing things that are wrong. So the productivity from that number of people certainly goes up. But
right.
So in 1970, we had 500,000 women in the United States whose job was to plug telephone switches into switchboards. And now we have zero, but we do still have 40,000 people babysitting the network in various ways.
Right, and that was the example, and that was a great example, and I guess my assertion is that, A, those people are no longer needed. And
the 40,000.
They're
going down.
They won't be.
But so I guess then the question for that, you can imagine a happy and an unhappy future for this, and I gather your book imagines a sort of unhappy future for it. But the question is, this disruption happened to agricultural workers over the last 150 years. The vast majority of people who were working as farmhands, their jobs got disrupted. But nobody seems terribly. I mean, there's small towns in Nebraska that are sad about this fact. But for the most part, this has been a really positive change. So, Gerald, do you imagine that as is this a good thing if this is going to happen?
It all depends on how we manage the transition. So
that's a good non-answer.
It's very much under our control, and we have gone through transitions both in agriculture and manufacturing, and of course we have a huge service sector right now. And they're really. I think there are really three debates here. The first is, are we going to develop robotics, AI, and other disruptive technologies that will both substitute for human labor and also eliminate in kind of entire sectors, as Amy was saying. And when you look at the developments of just the last few years, it's very nascent at this point, but I think we can see the path to where these technologies are going to have a very significant impact on existing employment in the kinds of categories that Amy was talking about. Then the second debate is about the most common reaction is, okay, well, but we've always created new jobs whenever that happens. Agriculture, manufacturing, we have created new jobs. And so I'd just like to bring a little data, because a lot of that conversation is anecdotal, and the plural of anecdote is data, but there's also a lot more data that's available than just anecdotes. So if we can start with slide 9, this might be helpful for people. So when you look at occupations, in 2014, the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out data every year. 535 major occupations. These are not tiny little jobs, but the major things that people do. And it is true that if you go back to 1914, 100 years ago, 20% of the occupations that we have today did not exist 100 years ago. But that means 80% did. If you go down that list, you will find 80% of the occupations existed 100 years ago. And if you actually look at the number of workers in those occupations, 90% of people in the US workforce work in occupations that existed 100 years ago. So while we do create new jobs and new types of jobs, the most common jobs, if you look at the 50 top occupations, there's only one, mine, software engineer, which is new in the last 100 years. So there's a common perception that we create new types of jobs. But the most common jobs are things like waiters and waitresses and truck drivers and cashiers and secretaries and teachers and nurses. And these are jobs that have existed for a long time, and they've existed with human workers because only humans could do those jobs.
But not anymore.
Although back,
back
100 years ago, we had 60% of the labor force as farmers, and 2% in post-farm food processing and so forth.
So there's been a huge shift.
Now we have 2% farmers and 8% in food.
There's been this is just about whether we are truly creating brand new things, over time. We're mostly shifting people into those jobs that computers and robots could not yet do. And when you look at what is going to be possible in the next, I agree with your time frame, kind of 15, 20 years versus 100 years, I think a lot of those occupations are going to be at risk. And so people say, okay, well, yes, we invent new jobs. We also invent whole new industries. And so if we go to slide 8, I think it's important to look at the industries that we do create and how many jobs they have in them and how many jobs growth we get out of that. This is data on total employment from 1993 to 2013. This is the internet era, 93 to 2013, 20-year time period. Obviously, we had a significant disruption in 2008. So we only added 23 million net jobs in this time period. Should have been higher than that, but we had a big dip. So if you look at where does that growth come from, half of that growth of 23 million net new jobs came in food services, retail, healthcare, education, and people driving vehicles for a living. So that's where half of that growth came from. If you take every high-tech industry, computer industry, internet, telecom, electronics, aerospace, chemistry, scientific R&D, only 5% of the growth in the last 20 years came from those industries. And in fact, those industries are only 6% of employment growth. So people talk about, oh, well, we'll invent whole new industries that people work in. The new industries we're inventing are not mass employers. They simply do not generate mass numbers of jobs of the kind that we have in those other industries. We added 4 times more jobs in food service and retail than in every other high-tech industry in the last 20 years. Those are the jobs that we've been creating. And those are the jobs that are very subject to automation. And then finally, people talk about the STEM jobs, or, well, people get replaced by automation, and so they should they'll just get educated and retrained and move to higher skill technical jobs or maybe creative jobs. These are the outlets that people think of. So if we go to slide 10, again, just to bring a little more data, this is the last slide. So you have total employment, about 145 million jobs, and about 8% of those are every computer job, scientific job, technician job, mathematician, data scientist. All of those jobs are about 8% of jobs. And then the little green, I apologize, it's really hard to see. The little green sliver there is every creative job in the economy. Photographers, artists, actors, writers, editors, choreographers, dancers, and all the media jobs, people here in the media industry, broadcasters, journalists, et cetera. And so that's a very small percentage of the economy. The economy is simply not made up of STEM jobs and creative jobs. So the second debate is really about, well, we'll be able to create all kinds of new jobs. We haven't really had an economy that's created fundamentally new kinds of jobs. What it's basically done is shifted a lot of people into jobs that computers and robots have not been able to do. And so I think there's a serious debate about whether the economy is actually going to be able to generate new jobs as these technologies step forward. The last debate that I'd like to get out there is, what do we do as a society when the demand for human labor begins to significantly fall off because of these new technologies? And I think that's the most interesting, the debate that is about 15, 20 years out, but we need to start talking about now, because it involves very radical rethinking of the assumptions about full employment, about people surviving based on needing to have a job. And I think there are very interesting solutions that have been proposed to this problem, including one that's been endorsed left, right, and center, which is a basic income guarantee that gives everyone a foundation on which to build their lives, but guarantees them an income that says they don't need to work to survive. And so I hope we can talk about some of those potential future solutions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go to the solution phase, I wanted to talk one more about a specific industry that Jeremy's been working on, which is healthcare. And that was one of the big job growth industries in your slide. It's been an industry that has been taking up a larger and larger share of the labor force over time. There's this expectation that we're going to need a ton of home health aides. It's been an industry that has been stubbornly slow in productivity growth. Your business seems to be premised on changing that, right? The idea is to actually be able to automate some of these jobs. It seemed like not only we couldn't automate them, we couldn't even make them significantly more productive. Are you expecting a real change in the way the labor market works in healthcare that reduces healthcare employment?
It depends on the time frame. The more immediate issue for me is that 4 billion people in the world don't have access to modern medical diagnostics. And so according to the World Economic Forum, it would take about 350 years to train enough medical expertise to meet the current needs of the world population in terms of what we would expect as basic healthcare diagnostic expectations. So for me, my goal is to increase the productivity by an order of magnitude or so and massively reduce the number of mistakes so that we can treat those 4 billion people with the number of medical experts that we realistically can train within this time frame. I think, though, I think it is interesting to talk about medicine as a particular interesting vertical. It's a $3 trillion business. It's maybe the world's largest business. It's maybe has the highest social impact. That's why I've chosen to work in this business. But I think more importantly, perhaps, is to think about the foundation of what's creating all this change, which is machine learning. How many people here are somewhat familiar with machine learning as a concept? Maybe half. So just to clarify, machine learning refers to a different way to get computers to do something new. There's two ways to get a computer to do something new. One way is to program it, which is to describe the steps necessary to do something. And the second way is to tell the computer the outcome you want and have the computer figure out how to achieve the outcome. And the latter is called machine learning. It's not new, it's been around since 1956. But what has happened recently is it's got to the point where it's got better than humans in a wide range of areas. So back in 1962, a machine learning system was better than the Connecticut state champion at playing checkers. So it's like a very specific thing, kind of. But by 2015, we're now at a point where machine learning systems are better than humans at seeing things and recognizing what they are. So there's a very popular annual contest called ImageNet where people try and get computers to look at 1.5 million photos and say what they're a photo of. And we're now at a point where a computer does that better than a human does. Very strikingly in this particular area of perception, computers have got, so I've got a popular talk on TED.com where in November I said they've got 10,000 times faster and 10 times more accurate in the last 5 years. That is now 15x out of date. Since November, we're now another 15 times faster. So in my business,
Are we any more accurate since November?
Also increase in accuracy and also a decrease in computational resources and power. So in my industry, we do a lot of work in radiology and pathology and so forth. We're seeing, order of magnitude improvements every few months. We're having to constantly stay on top of the literature. We're now starting to see that happen also in understanding written text. Now, if you think about the kind of stuff that Gerald was talking about, he said very perceptively, humans currently do the things that computers can't do yet. So a lot of that yet is because humans can have perception and computers don't have perception, and computers can't read and humans can read. So that's basically now changed or changing. Now, because these things are changing exponentially, in about 5 years' time, they'll be hundreds or thousands of times better than us. And that's just one computer. And when, of course, you join them all together, you have many more orders of magnitude better than us. So the challenge with this, which I think Gerald was referring to, is why do we need to be having the conversation now? We don't know whether it's going to be 100 years or 20 years. There was a large survey of the world's top machine learning experts. I actually used to be the president of the world's largest community of 250,000 machine learning practitioners. And before I was president, I was the highest ranked practitioner on that platform myself. So I think it's good to talk to a machine learning practitioner to say what's possible with machine learning. And the general belief in that community, who are the closest to the actual technology that's making this change, is that it'll be between 10 to 30 years. So the question of is it more or less than 20 years is about the right question. We don't know. But it'll probably be in your lifetime, it'll certainly be in your kid's lifetime, and within 5 to 10 years of computers being better than humans at most of the things humans do, 5 years later, it'll be 1,000 times better.
But still, we'll want to hire people. They all still want to hire a personal trainer. Well, because having this machine tell me that my time yesterday was the worst time so far this year on a Monday doesn't quite cut it.
That's right. So there is a new economy which can work. So this is not necessarily a dystopian future. I think better than having us here would be to have a 5-year-old here. And you say to a 5-year-old, experts say in 20 years' time, computers will be able to do better than humans, almost everything humans do for work now. What would happen? And the 5-year-olds would say, well, the humans wouldn't have to work anymore. And then you'd ask the 5-year-old, so what would the human do? Anything they like. So yeah, absolutely. They can have all kinds of wonderful peer-to-peer exercise groups every morning where they're, really giving each other a morale boost to get fitter and stronger and sitting around and philosophizing or practicing the violin. You can absolutely have a wonderful utopian future in we do what we want to do, rather than, again, as Gerald said, most of the world is doing shitty jobs, which are more like chopping celery than being a thought leader at the Melkin conference, And so if you say to those guys, would you like to stop chopping celery tomorrow? And if you didn't have to chop celery every day, what would you do instead? They will give you an answer, There's plenty of people in the world that don't have to work anymore and they're not all sitting around, crying because they have no meaning left in life. Meaning in life does not come from chopping celery.
But there's the flip side of this, right? 100 years ago, a huge number of comedians were making quite a good living as barnstorming vaudeville performers. And now what we have is we have my first cousin, Phil Lord, his partner, Chris Miller, 200 man-years of effort, and 21 and 22 Jump Street together yielding 600 million gross in theaters as the industry, and thus technologically unemploying a huge number of people who would be very good one-personal comedians, who are all starving in the streets and waitressing in the streets of Venice right now.
But we have Periscope, we have Meerkat, we have a number of one to many or one to few direct networks where those can be monetized. You know, so
or if not monetized, statusized, that you can be.
Which then leads to money. We've had like 4 different viewpoints now on timing, and here's the most important thing. It doesn't matter whether it's 7 years or 100 years. What matters most is that your organizations are having meaningful conversations. And I, you know, in my practice, I don't see that happening enough with any emerging technology. You send thought leaders to conferences like these. You take a bunch of notes. You go back. They're synthesized and optimized and put out as a fancy report. But there's nobody who is. There's no real effort in continuing to monitor what's happening at the fringe, even if that, you know, whatever is going to happen is 100 years or, you know, 20 years or 15 years or whatever, right?
But so with, go ahead.
I think there's organizations and the kind of people that are in this room, and I think they should be looking for those fringe and disruptive technologies, because it's actually quite difficult sometimes for organizations to adopt some of these technologies. I mean, no one likes firing, you know, 50 or 100 people and replacing them with a machine. But so that is not necessarily the way that this happens.
Like that.
So, yeah, but many don't. It's, you know, it's a human relationship in most companies. But where they get blindsided is by the competitor that, of course, does that. The competitor starts with the disruptive technology and has a much lower cost structure, and all of a sudden they find that they have to let go of those 50 people anyway because of what Amy's talking about.
And it may have been a shiny object situation where they acted too early, right? And then
but there's also, I mean, in addition to organizations and businesses which face kind of disruptive pressures from this technology, I think there's also a significant policy question. And so, you know, what is the social contract in a world where less human labor is needed because of these machines? Or if it is needed, you know, to Brad's point about personal trainers, when the only jobs that are left are ones that you get because you're just a human, then we know what that's going to do from a supply and demand perspective to the wages you can earn from that job. And you might theoretically be able to have a lot of leisure, but the fact is that we still have a money-based economy.
So I think everybody here has mentioned something along these lines of like, this all works out as long as you find some suitable way of distributing wealth. And at the moment, wealth distribution is based on an assumption of a scarcity of labor. And so as long as we have that assumption, we're going to struggle. And the one country in the world that perhaps most strongly has that assumption baked into its psyche is the United States of America.
So this is then, I guess, you can look at this as 2 sides of the coin, right? Labor supply and income inequality are, you know, if you bid down the price of labor enough, you should be able to eliminate your labor shortage. The problem is that then you've bid down the price of labor so much such that people are earning incomes that are not satisfactory in order to maintain an orderly society, right? I mean,
that is only true if humans can add economic value at some price, and that's an assumption which we're saying at some point will be by many orders of magnitude not true.
Well, but I think that's a point of disagreement on the panel, though, right? Because the question is, you know, you could have really a lot of personal trainers and yoga instructors and personal chefs.
Yes.
Yes,
Cardinal Richelieu had a personal staff of 200 in the 17th century.
There will not be personal chefs. It's only the things, as Gerald said, which are because you're humans. That's basically motivation or performance.
People
like talking to the chef. I don't know. My trigger
so that's performance. Okay. So, but it's not because they're a chef. It's because they're a human to chat to. So you won't watch a mechanized violin player. Mm-hmm. We enjoy a violin player because we appreciate a human being able to do that skill.
Oh, but we do overwhelmingly listen to Yo-Yo Ma on our iPhones rather than demanding that paying a
Right,
fortune to
but we
actually go
don't
see
listen
him.
to pianola's recordings. We listen to the human recording.
Yeah.
And if somebody told you it was a pianola recording, it's the same damn thing. But you're like,
Well, then what is?
I'm on the board of directors for the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and to be fair, we are listening less and less, and we are much, we prefer music content that's on our portable devices that's not really been made so much by people.
Is EDM music produced by a human or music produced by a computer?
Both, right?
Well, it's somewhere in between,
Do you guys know what
right?
that is?
Electronic dance music. So,
So.
like the
All the cool kids are listening.
yes.
You're not cool. Some of you aren't.
So just to push back a little bit on this, the shorter time frames that we've seen here, I feel like I've been hearing for the last 20 years that we're not going to have cable anymore in 5 years.
And we shouldn't. If we didn't have cable, if I didn't get enslaved to Comcast, I would be so happy.
Well, yeah, but be that as it may, the predicted change has not come around. And more broadly, I feel like there's this perception that we're in this period of unusually rapid economic change due to technology. But if you look back at the economic data, I think the economic change due to technological advance was much more rapid during the Industrial Revolution, during the immediate post-World War II era. If we're having this immense disruptive economic change, we should be see it showing up, particularly in the form of
we're
increased
not
productivity.
having it. We're going to have it. Like the stuff I was talking about has happened in academia in the last 2.5 years. It hasn't really hit any products yet. The difference is that what Amy showed, the S-curve, this is the first ever technology that doesn't have an S-curve. When you're talking about an ability to create intellectual output, and that intellectual output can improve the ability to create intellectual output, you have the first truly exponential technology. Previously, everything that looked like an exponential technology is a bunch of S's stacked on top of each other. But this is actually a different kind of technology, where actually machine learning is about creating better intellectual capacity that can be used to create better intellectual capacity. And what does it look like to say, we've created all the intellectual capacity? Like, that's not even like a concept that seems to make sense.
But so just because not everybody is on the same tech space, so machine learning is a piece of this, right? And there are many other emerging technologies that are.
My
that
claim is that the
intersect in
machine
that
learning is
the dominant
the
force?
thing which everything, like once you automate intellect, everything else falls out
from that?
naturally.
Yeah.
That's my thesis.
I mean, I kind of look, I mean, it takes a lot longer than technologists think.
Yeah.
I can imagine the first person who managed to successfully domesticate a stallion in 2000 BC, which is a very hard thing to do. Saying, wow, having people pull things is now technologically obsolete. 50 years ago, there were people in the streets of Beijing who were still essentially horses pulling rickshaws, as far as their lives were concerned. It took 4,000 years or so to kind of obsolete human beings as pullers of carts fully. We still have 150 million people worldwide whose manufacturing assembly line jobs are things that elsewhere in the world are or that could very easily be roboticized.
And yet it took.
It's going to take a longer time.
And yet it took less time
Yes.
for Instagram
Yes.
to be built
Yes.
than for the Instagram co-founder to have his visa processed.
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
might say something about the
Yes.
immigration
Yes.
system in
Yes.
America.
Well,
Or it may
yeah.
say so. Like the time frames have changed so
Yeah.
much. 2 years ago, Microsoft Research was demonstrating the first ever
Yes.
speech-to-speech real-time translation
Right.
system at a
Right.
conference in Beijing. And now they're just on the verge of releasing on Skype for humans for the first time speech-to-speech real-time
it's out in
translation
beta.
system. It's now out of beta.
Yeah.
So like these time frames are getting very compressed now.
And there are deep problems of measurement here, right? That is, mostly economists measure the economy by saying what is sold and what are people willing to pay for it. But then we have all kinds of things that, are not sold, but are valuable. And they're not sold because it's nearly impossible to control the distribution. So something like Google survives off of the fumes generated by its ability to sell your eyeballs to advertisers, rather than surviving off of the value of the service. Something like Wikipedia, which gives everyone access to encyclopedic information that I was willing to pay $3,000 for to get a personal copy of in the 1980s, is now available to everyone. And even though HBO is sending me nasty grams to Google Fiber about how I illegally downloaded the fourth Game of Thrones show
Was it
before
worth it?
it's supposed to. Yes, it was quite worth it. They're not able to control the distribution. They're going to be able to charge $10 for a month for access to HBO content for most people for a while.
So a couple of things. One, and I should have said this earlier in the panel, if you have questions, the best thing is if you can direct message them to me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @jbarrow, Jbarro. If you don't have Twitter, first of all, the robots are going to come for you first. You can also send me a text message at 917-405-6194. So if we say I'm wrong on this and Brad is wrong on this, and it really is this short. Sorry, 917-405-6194. So
you should now expect, several million
yes,
texts,
yeah.
once this gets published.
Mostly from machines. So if we're wrong about this time frame thing, and you guys are right, and really this is an impending thing, I think part of the reason people are so afraid about this change is that we're looking at it from this position now where we've not experienced the productivity growth and the economic growth yet that will come from these things. And we're looking out and we can see the technological change that might come. If that technological change comes, it ought to bring economic growth with it that would then, you brought up a basic income earlier. One of the main problems with a basic income right now is that it would be really expensive to finance. You would need a very large tax increase to pay for it that would look challenging within our fiscal capacity, even more challenging within the fiscal capacity of European countries that already have higher levels of public spending. Shouldn't we be more optimistic about this in that if this problem arises, it will pay for its own fix?
Yeah, so over time, it will. So that growth and that productivity increase will make a basic income much easier to afford, but you have to provide people with a means to participate in the economy when they no longer have, through no fault of their own, the ability to sell their labor into the economy. And so that's the idea behind a universal basic income. It doesn't preclude you from working, and you don't get penalized for
working. And you're not recommending it now, is that right? You're saying in the future
that's right. It's a solution that we need to consider in the future. We need to get the dialogue going because these things do take a long time to work through the political process. And so, so this is kind of preemptively, Neil Jacobstein, who's at Singularity University, had an interview recently where he talked about how poor societies are at seeing the train wreck coming and trying to proactively, have the conversation and try and work against the train wreck actually coming. And I think that's where we are now, is really starting that process of
and Martin
of the
Ford
dialogue.
has a new book out on this exact topic, so check that out, Martin Ford, which is basically a book describing how machine learning is going to create this future and how the basic income guarantee could be a solution to this.
So and his software bots are sending me a new email every 3 days, it seems, about the book.
I will say this. I have a 5-year-old, and I think that everybody's very sort of pro-STEM, pro-STEAM right now, where we need to lift people out of whatever situation they're in. We need to teach them Python and R, or whatever else. And the challenge is that we're seeing a very rapid pace of change, and I don't know that those skills are going to be transferable. You might know this better than anybody. I think having a good foundation, a good liberal arts foundation, is going to sound nuts, but if you are able to solve problems and you have a good
Hey,
sort
I'm a
of critical
philosophy
reasoning.
major, so...
No, but
That's good.
But I think there's
agree
something
with you.
to that, right?
There's something really weird right now where a lot of people ask me about this thing. Have you guys heard about deep learning? So deep learning is a particular kind of machine learning, which is it's a particular algorithm for machine learning where we've now mathematically proven that there are no limits to what this particular algorithm can compute. And the more computation time you give it and the more data you give it, the better it becomes at that computation. So this includes computing things like how to translate language or how to diagnose disease or how to drive a car. These are all just mathematical functions. And people keep on asking me, holy shit, this sounds great. Where do I send my kids to go and learn about deep learning? And this is actually a thing now where every 2 to 3 months, it's totally changed. And so there is no university degree you can get. There's nowhere you can go to learn about it. There's no book about it. Because it's like as fast as the new papers come out, it's
Right.
obsoleted what was 2 months old.
And by the time you spend 7 years getting your curricula passed,
Yeah, people ask
everything will
me,
be-
like, what should I do in my PhD in deep learning all the time? And I'm always like, a PhD in deep learning? You've got to be insane. By the time it's finished, we'll be done, you know?
what you're talking about is so important because it's almost as it's almost as though we denigrate people for not having now that super high sort of tech skill, and we need plumbers, highly skilled plumbers. We need highly skilled people in all different types of fields that we no longer venerate.
Yeah,
right?
It will shift again. I mean, Tyler Cohen wrote a book called Average is Over, and he kind of predicted kind of a 15% world of super talented with entrepreneurial skills or scientific skills, creative skills, and then he was really concerned about the 85% of the other people. We may end up down the road looking much more at the liberal arts because what we're going to want is a very educated citizenship. And we need citizens and participants in our democracy, and they're going to be doing all kinds of things with their time in their communities. And I mean, we could see in the utopian version of this, we have abundance from the technology that we've created, and we have distribution of wealth that's generated to enable people to live with dignity and not be in a welfare situation. And there could be a great flourishing of creative, community, and other activities where people participate locally, and they have the time to do that. No one has the time to do that right now. Participate in local government and community activities. They're working 2-3 jobs, and they don't have the time.
So we have a question from the floor from an anonymous 301 number, which this is an issue that I hadn't thought of with taking questions by text message. So if you can text me your name when you text me. But somebody from Maryland would like to know, basically, are we just going to have to redefine what it means to be full-time employed in the economy? It seems that this is not going to be a shift that happens overnight, right? You're going to have gradual decline in various kinds of labor, and we're already partly going through this shift by reducing the number of years that constitute prime age. As people are retiring earlier and people are going through more years of education, that already creates a contraction in the labor supply. You could have a reduction in the number of hours that is typically worked in a week to constitute full-time. Even the Affordable Care Act changes some expectations about what full-time employment are. You had a lot of people who were working to stay enough hours in their job in order to get health care who will now choose to work fewer hours a week because that makes it possible for them. So can't we just deal with a lot of this shift? I mean, I referenced the Jetsons at the beginning, but George Jetson worked 3 days a week, 3 hours a day. You could have a gradual decline in hours worked per week by a full-time employee and a gradual decline in the number of years that people participate in the labor force. And that would do a lot on the labor supply side to deal with declines in labor demand.
And in America, it's puzzling we haven't, right? That we've been stuck at 40 hours a week is full-time or so since World War II, even though there have been 75 years since then. And among our lower upper class, at least, let's say J.P. Morgan
Our
in 1900.
lower upper class, you mean these are the merely affluent, the people making 175
the merely
grand?
affluent, the merely affluent
There's a
at
cult
least
of busyness.
claim to be working 60 hours a week and barely taking maybe 2 weeks of vacation a year if they're lucky. And yet back in 1900, J.P. Morgan would say, I can do a year's work in 9 months, I can't do it in 12, and would take off on his yacht for Europe to buy up art in a palazzo for 3 months every year and come back to the corner of Broad and Wall Street no worse the wear for the fact that he'd been out of his deal flow for 3 months.
And Ben Franklin was 4 hours, right? 4 hours a day?
Right, but the issue with, it's not so much reducing hours. I mean, when you have machines substituting for humans or eliminating their jobs, it's not just an issue that we could, share the work. When you have self-driving cars in 10 years and autonomous fleets of vehicles, those are 4 million people in the U.S. that drive for a living. It's not like they can just work fewer hours. Their skill is, or their labor is no longer valued by the economy. It's more of a direct substitution.
But that's not going to be an overnight shift either. I mean, it's like
I think we're in the middle of that overnight shift.
Well, but
I mean, we're at the beginning of that overnight.
We're at the beginning, yes.
We've shifted.
But people, people roll in and out of the labor force over time. Like if we have a period of 15 years over which an industry dies, you get a lot of just natural attrition out of the industry.
I don't think that's the way to think of it. It's not about an industry dying. I mean, let's just imagine there's some point in the future, in X years' time. Maybe it's 100,000 years, or in fact, let's call it 10 to the X years' time, where X is somewhere between 1 and 6, or whatever. But there's the time. And that time in 10 to the X years' time is the time when computers can do everything humans can do, only better. There's no reason for us to, other than things where humans enjoy another human's performance because they're human. So between now and 10 to the X years' time, there will be a point where humans can do half of the things. There'll be enough for half of the humans to add any economic value. So it's not about shifting in and out of industries. It's about the amount of useful labor that humans can add shrinking as there's less things which computers
can't do.
I agree with that, but that's applying today's prism to 10 to the X, right? So we, and our jobs and our economy are driven by behavior. So how
No, there's also the fact that what we want to do may well be different than have computers do everything for us, right? Is it Peter Thiel who's extremely upset at the fact that engineers have been building not flying cars for him, but instead 140 characters? And yet I go to people like my daughter and my son, and what they value the most about modern technology is the way it allows them to keep up with their friends all the time. Right, that it greatly enlarges their social network and their feeling of connectedness, because the core thing we evolved to do was to gossip. Right, back in the environment of evolutionary adaptation, those people who gossiped knew useful and interesting things, and so could use the power of crowdsourcing everything to figure out where the leopard was and which particular fruit you could eat. While those that didn't gossip and kept their information for themselves learned nothing and were eaten by the leopards, after all.
But software development is very much in the process of being automated. So the idea of different types of software we can develop, that's not a thing either. That's also in the process of being automated.
We're no longer saying write this particular number in this particular memory location on this particular drum as it spins.
But there's also population. So we don't know 10 to the X from now. We don't know what our global population is going to look like, right? So to some extent, we're talking about a future. I mean, I feel pretty secure in what I'm thinking about 15 to 20 years from now. But we have no idea what global populations will look like, and what our maybe we have significantly more people than we are even thinking about right now, right?
So we have a question from Randy, who has IBM's Watson cookbook, which I didn't know this is a thing. But
Yes.
So he says Watson has terrible taste, and that
Terrible taste for your palate.
yes. So it's your fault, Randy. Maybe you have terrible taste. But so his question is, will Watson's taste improve over time? And more broadly, this assumption that people prefer these human interactions, will the computers become so personable that maybe we don't need our personal trainer to pretend like he's a therapist? We can pretend the computer is our therapist, and even those human interaction jobs are at risk.
Did you see Her?
Yes, yeah. I mean, is that going to happen?
Of course it's going to happen. I mean, how could it not happen?
Well, I don't know.
But what could be the constraint which would stop that from happening at 10 to the X? We know there's an existence proof for a 60-watt computer that can do what humans do. We're in the process of building that computer smaller and lower power and better. And only the one we're building, you can network to each other as much as you like.
But isn't that a human then?
There are two ways that you can do this now. So so Watson has already got a product out. If you tweet at me or email me, I will email you the demo link for you to play with. You type an email in, and depending on who, it analyzes your social data and behavior, and depending on who you are, it will rewrite that communication so that it's most likely to attract me to solve whatever needs I have. There's another tool called Crystal, Crystal. It's Crystal app. It hasn't come out yet. It'll be out this summer. But again, I can look at anybody that I want. It is aggregating hundreds of thousands of pieces of data. And to be fair, you know, it's not a complete profile, but we're the beginning of this. But
Yeah.
it will, in real time, change the way that I'm attempting to communicate with that person based on the way that they are most likely to respond to whatever it is that I'm
And
doing.
in 5
which is
years'
a brute
time,
force
it'll be
version.
10,000 times better.
Right,
That's
so
the
it's a-
thing.
it's a
This
brute
is-
force
this is
version of
gonna
what
take
you're
one
I
year.
will play poker against people, but I'm very unlikely to play online poker against machines because I know there are no cards back there. There are no deal. There is no other human mind back there. Instead, there's simply an algorithm that is trained to figure out to let me win enough and often enough and just barely enough to extract as much money as possible from me.
But people,
That I have the illusion of a relationship with
So this is-
people
this
in a
is
game
human-
of skill.
This is enjoying human
but-
performance.
But people-
Human performance is something we will always have.
but
Okay.
lots of
Computers
people
can
do
never
do
replace.
that.
I know,
first of all, people
including
play
my
slot
mother-in-law,
machines.
yes.
Well,
Yes.
One other thing I discovered in Vegas is that there is an Ellen DeGeneres slot machine that has like life-size Ellen DeGeneres on the side in a pantsuit, and then when you trigger the bonus round, Ellen comes up on the screen and like blows a noisemaker to congratulate you personally. So, I mean, obviously, I know Ellen's not inside the box, but people, this is a close enough facsimile of human interaction. Lots of people are losing money to fake Ellen DeGeneres.
That is very appealing.
Yeah. So is that, I mean, not everyone has your preference set. Maybe some people already are willing to lose money to the machine, and as it becomes more lifelike, you might go in for that.
Yeah. There are a lot of examples of people, even some areas that people think of as, absolutely out of bounds. I mean, in terms of emotional connection, and there, going back to 1960s, there was the early example of the very primitive ELIZA program, that people were interacting with that just kind of, asked them questions and was non-judgmental, and there are examples now of Japan in particular is looking at a lot of care for the elderly, and they're inventing robots and other small kind of cuddly things that demonstrate the signs of kind of human empathy. And people relate to these things. They anthropomorphize them. They embed them with emotional content. And I think we may be very surprised at the range of things that you just assume, oh, well, a machine could never take over that job, or people will never relate to a machine in that way, and we're already seeing signs that they will.
Well, so is this a reason, I mean, and this is a very broad question
This
to
is
close
an
off the
Isaac
panel.
Asimov novel called The Robots of Dawn, I'll point out.
But so should we be broadening our concerns beyond the labor market and saying that, computers are ultimately going to disrupt the entire market for humanity? If a computer can not only do our jobs but fall in love with us, then
That is the thesis of another new book which came out last week by a guy called Marshall Brain, and the book is called The Second Intelligent Species. And the thesis of this book, so Marshall has been studying this for a lot longer than probably any of us here. He wrote a book called Manna back in 2002, and everything he's predicted so far has come true. And we're kind of like in the middle of his book. Check it out, it's an unbelievable book. So in The Second Intelligent Species, his thesis is exactly this. It's basically take something that can grow exponentially, and within a few generations of that growth, we are to them as amoebas are to us, And, this is well beyond now the question of like, what do we do for work? I mean, this is a kind of very existential question.
Yes.
But I mean, it's not something that I can see any reason why we can rule it out. Because you asked the question just now, isn't the existence proof of a human just saying we can build a human? But the thing is, humans have been built under huge constraints, right? The human evolution is built around the constraints of like, what kind of resources do we have access to? And kind of within that evolutionary constraints, we've come here so far. But what we can create with machine learning can potentially be far more powerful than that, because we can give it far more resources than any human has access to. We could potentially launch into space something that can capture, a significant amount of the energy of the sun, for example. Mm-hmm. So like the scope of what these intelligences can do is certainly far beyond what we really can conceive
is
of.
That we already have done it, that we already are, at least here in the United States, in this room, a post-scarcity society. That is, if you go back 50,000 years and you ask people what they would like, they'd say enough food that I'm not hungry all the time, hopefully with enough protein and calcium that my children aren't stunted. enough clothing when necessary that I'm not cold, and shelter so that I'm not wet when it rains. And other than that, you know, a secure life and protection from large fanged predators. And those are the good things in life. Get me all of those, and everything else is just, you know, unimportant status games, because what's really important, you know.
And yet, 5
it's gone.
billion people in the world kind of don't
No,
have
5
those
billion
things.
people do not yet have that.
And that's because we're so bad at
We're very bad at distribution.
So I
Nevertheless,
think that's kind of a key
yeah.
issue here, is as everything
Yeah,
grows,
yeah.
can we fix distribution?
But nevertheless, we in this room are already at a, you know, that, well, to actually buy that in Los Angeles or Manhattan, enough shelter so you're not
Yeah.
wet, can be
Yes.
very expensive.
Well, but-
Yes.
But if we're willing
And
to move
healthcare.
to Brooklyn,
Brooklyn's more expensive than Manhattan right now.
But shelter at a standard that would look appealing to a caveman is actually
Yes.
not that expensive in Manhattan. Like, you know,
Here's the thing about this conversation.
Yes.
I think that we need to. I don't necessarily think there's a correlation or a need to correlate the advancement of technology with changes in the economy. I'm not an economist, so, but I don't think that we should or need to mash those two things together. They're just different, and I don't see our technological future as a dystopian one. I just see it as different. And for many people, different is dystopia, right? Which is something you should get over.
well, on that note, that's the end of the panel. I want to thank all of you for coming today.